Hey guys, tonight we'll slowly step into the shadows of the Tudor dynasty, where we'll explore the story of Anne of Cleves, the woman who survived the brutality of history with an uncommon, sharp wit. Could just a single glance change the fate of a kingdom, turning a royal bride into a rejected wife after only 6 months? Henry VIII, the fierce English king, rushed to marry Anne the moment he admired her exquisite portrait. But when the face-to-face meeting finally occurred, Henry was struck down by shock, declaring her unfavored, even ugly, in the cruelest possible way. Anne was quickly branded the rejected queen, a stain that seemed impossible to remove. But listen closely. The truth hidden behind that sudden disgust is not simple at all. Was it the result of an awkward diplomatic blunder during a secret initial meeting, or merely a political maneuver to discard a wife who was no longer useful? The strangest thing is this. Among Henry's 6 wives, Anne was the only one who survived, kept her head, was respected after the annulment, and was even buried as a queen at the prestigious Westminster Abbey. Tonight, we'll uncover the secret of Anne of Cleves' quiet intelligence. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as usual, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Let this story lull you into a deep sleep. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As soon as the portrait of Anne of Cleves was brought back by Hans Holbein, Henry VIII immediately decided to make her his wife. But that very first meeting revealed a harsh reality. Anne did not resemble the dream in the painting. He complained that she was not as fair as she hath been reported, that Hans Holbein had applied his cosmetics too liberally, and that Thomas Cromwell, the architect of the marriage, had incessantly praised her beauty. Anne of Cleves, born Anna von Cleves, entered the world in Dusseldorf in the Duchy of Cleves in the year 1515. Although most records simply note the year 1515, historical sources indicate 2 possible birth dates, the 28th day of June or the 22nd day of September in the year 1515. This discrepancy arises from the fragmentary nature of contemporary records, some drawn from church registers, others from local festival calendars, so later scholars have not been able to pinpoint a single, definitive date. Mentioning both possibilities honors the integrity of the sources and reminds viewers that in history, even seemingly minor details may carry uncertainty and intriguing stories. She was the third of 5 children born to Duke John III of Cleves, commonly called John the Peaceful, and his wife, Maria of Jülichburg. On her father's side, her grandfather was John II, Duke of Cleves, and her grandmother was Maria of Jülichburg. On her mother's side, her grandmother Sibylle of Brandenburg was the daughter of Frederick the Great of Brandenburg, and her grandfather was William IV, Duke of Jülichburg. This family was renowned among the Protestant faction. They openly challenged the authority of the Vatican and stood alongside the reform movement of Martin Luther. From early childhood, Anne grew up amid passionate theological debates held behind closed doors in the ducal palace. Of her siblings, her 2 elder sisters, Sibylle and Maria, both married into Swedish and Prussian nobility, while her younger sister Amalia was admired for her delicate beauty, but was never chosen as the English king's bride. Her eldest brother, Wilhelm, inherited the ducal throne of Cleves and continued to maintain alliances with Northern Europe. The bond between Anne and her mother and sisters suffused every gesture from afternoons spent embroidering together in the fabric room to private tea gatherings where Anne's reserved and composed character, tempered by quiet strength, gradually took shape. A German noble education made Anne fluent in Latin and French and endowed her with talent as an amateur painter. She studied in the ducal chapel, where preachers emphasized individual faith over papal mediation. Alongside her penmanship lessons, Anne devoured the scriptures and the history of ancient Rome, while practicing intricate embroidery and sketching rural German landscapes. Anne's path to Henry began when Thomas Cromwell, spotting an opportunity to forge an alliance with northern Germany, proposed using Anne as a crucial diplomatic pawn. In the year 1539, Cromwell dispatched master painter Hans Holbein to Dusseldorf, charged with producing 2 true-to-life portraits of Anne and her sister Amalia. "Do not flatter them," Cromwell instructed. "Paint them exactly as they are, so the king could decide." According to custom, The two misses of Cleves initially concealed their faces behind veils, forcing Holbein to employ every ounce of diplomacy to gain their trust before he could unveil their features and render their likenesses. When the paintings were completed, Henry examined them with rigorous scrutiny. Anne's gentle smile, the height of her brow, her clear yet thoughtful gaze. As the eldest daughter, Anne fulfilled the requirement of legitimate inheritance. Amalia, though lovely, did not possess the same dynastic claim. Ultimately, the king declared that Anne of Cleves would be his queen. Yet when she truly appeared in the banqueting hall at Westminster, Henry could not conceal the look of disappointment in his eyes. The monarch, who had dared to divorce Catherine of Aragon in pursuit of love and power, could not hide his revulsion when the living likeness before him failed to match the portrait. Anne's formal, somewhat hesitant smile, meant as a gesture of courtesy, struck him as overly modest and devoid of the charm he had anticipated. In that instant, the gulf between painted fantasy and flesh and blood reality overpowered political considerations and opened a new, dramatic chapter in Tudor history. Although Henry was displeased with Anne's appearance, the marriage plans pressed on because of their immense diplomatic importance. An alliance with the Duchy of Cleves provided the Tudor dynasty with a crucial bulwark against potential hostility from the Holy Roman Empire and Catholic Spain. Thus, in the chilly morning light of January 6, 1540, the grand coronation took place. Tapestries of Tudor roses adorned the hall. Trumpets blared over the throng of aristocrats, and Anne, in a gown of cream velvet embroidered with silver thread, took her vows as Queen of England. Yet the real trial came that very night, when the royal bedchamber door closed behind them and expectation met stark reality. Henry complained that Anne lacked experience and failed to arouse his desire. Worse still, he claimed he smelled an unpleasant odour, emanating from her at the most intimate moments. His disappointment, as deep as it was immediate, transformed into resolve he would free himself from this dangerous bond at all costs. Henry's court quickly unearthed a potential loophole. It appeared that, at the tender age of 11, Anne had once been promised in marriage to Francis of Lorraine, an arrangement that had never been fulfilled. Seizing upon this childhood pre-contract, the king's advisers prepared to petition for an annulment. They argued that the pre-existing betrothal, however misunderstood in Anne's youth, rendered her unable to consent freely to marriage with the monarch. In the days that followed, Westminster Hall became a carnival of legal and medical spectacle. All England's nobility gathered to witness the proceedings. Henry's own physician was summoned to testify not only on the matter of consummation, but also, embarrassingly, on the king's nocturnal physiology. The doctor confessed in hushed tones that His Majesty had suffered 2 instances of what he awkwardly termed nocturnal pollutions, what we might call wet dreams, despite sleeping each night beside Queen Anne. This testimony, though intimate to an extreme degree, served the political end. It implied that Henry was physically potent, yet had not consummated the marriage, thus preserving his honour while justifying the annulment. Amid the whispered laughter of courtiers, the judges deliberated. They concluded that the union between Henry and Anne had never been valid under God's law, never consummated in the eyes of heaven or of men. On July 9, 1540, exactly 6 months after the wedding, the final decree was pronounced. The marriage was void from the start. Anne of Cleves would no longer be queen, and her status would revert to that of a favoured noblewoman. For Anne, this outcome was bittersweet. She left the palace without the crown, but with her head firmly upon her shoulders, a remarkable feat in a time when vanquished queens might not fare so well. She was granted lands, an income befitting a royal sister, and the dignity of being called the king's beloved sister by royal proclamation. Yet none of these material comforts could fully erase the stinging memory of having placed her trust in a painted image, only to find herself bound to a king who recoiled from her in the flesh. In the hush that followed the annulment, Anne withdrew to her own estates, her reputation surprisingly intact. To many observers, she was the shortest-reigned queen in Tudor annals, her tenure lasting only half a year. Yet she emerged unbroken, a testament to her resilience and pragmatic grace. Henry, meanwhile, turned his focus to his next bride, but the shadow of the Cleves debacle lingered in his court's conversation for years to come. Thus ended Anne's brief sojourn in the full glare of royal glory. Though her time as queen consort was fleeting, her story revealed the turbulent interplay of politics, image, and expectation in Tudor England. And as the candles of Westminster Hall dimmed on that warm July evening in 1540, a new chapter in Anne's life was poised to begin, one defined not by a crown, but by the quiet strength of survival. After the annulment, it might have seemed that Anne could step away from all the drama. But Henry was not finished in his pursuit of a new happiness. Just a few weeks after the divorce decree, he turned his gaze to a fresh bride, Catherine Howard, his young cousin. The very idea of exchanging one former queen for another so swiftly was startling. Yet Catherine, with her vivacious spirit and courtly training, seemed to promise the romantic spark that had been so conspicuously absent with Anne. Remarkably, Anne bore no visible rancour. In the waning days of the old year, New Year's Day, 1541, she sent her ex-husband and his new queen 2 splendid war horses as gifts. These were not mere ponies, but grand destriers, their manes braided with silk ribbons and their tack adorned with silver buckles. The gesture was gracious to the point of disarming. It echoed through the corridors of Whitehall Palace, where courtiers murmured in astonishment. Anne even danced alongside Henry and Catherine at the subsequent court ball. Imagine a somnolent observer reclining in a velvet-lined gallery, watching the trio circle the floor. The new queen, the old queen, and the king between them. The scene unfolded with all the quiet elegance of a drawing-room minuet. Yet beneath its refined surface lay a swirl of intrigue. That winter, whispers began to drift like snowflakes through the stone hallways. In the 11th month of 1541, rumours took root that Anne of Cleves had secretly borne a child. Some versions of the tale went so far as to assert that the infant was Henry's own son, a scandal of the highest order. The rumour spread from noble table to servants' chamber, carried on the lips of chambermaids and footmen alike. Yet most reputable sources, even those loyal to the crown, quickly dismissed these stories as baseless gossip. Nonetheless, Henry could not countenance such talk. He issued a royal mandate. The rumour-mongers were to be hunted down and made an example of. 2 individuals identified as courtiers of middling rank were arrested and thrown into the Tower. They awaited trial in cold, damp cells, their only company the drip of water and the echo of distant footsteps. This stern response demonstrated that, though Anne had left the altar, she remained very much within the sphere of royal authority. Even the Queen, who had once been repudiated, still cast a long shadow over Tudor England. For Anne herself, these events must have felt like slumbering storms stirring in her wake. She had hoped for a respite after the annulment, a chance to live quietly on her estates. Instead, she found herself enmeshed in court politics all over again. Yet she met the upheaval with her characteristic calm. There were no angry proclamations or public displays of grievance. Instead, Anne retired to Richmond Palace, content to oversee household affairs, correspond with her brother, and nurture the friendships she had forged among the king's children. Meanwhile, Henry's marriage to Catherine Howard proved as tempestuous as one might expect. The new queen, barely 19, brought youthful exuberance, but soon found herself beset by the same perils of court life jealousy, intrigue, and the ever-watchful eyes of her predecessor's spectre. Rumours of Catherine's own indiscretions circulated, though none had the audacity of the whispered tale about Anne's secret child. Yet Henry, perhaps chastened by the Cleves affair, responded to each new scandal with surgical precision: annulment, execution, or banishment, depending on the nature of the offence. In this fluid courtly dance, Anne stood apart. She was neither the repudiated consort nor the fawning newcomer, but a figure in between a sister of the king and a motherly presence to his offspring. Her gift of horses and her unexpected friendship with Catherine underscored a rare magnanimity. She accepted her changed status with dignity, even as her name continued to stir currents of speculation. And so, while Henry swept forward in his quest for marital bliss, Anne's own story settled into a quieter rhythm. The rumours of a secret child faded into the background, remembered only in gossip-rousing ballads sung by tavern minstrels. Anne herself, content in her independent household, would live another 16 years beyond her brief reign. Yet in the hushed moments before sleep, the memory of that winter's intrigue of New Year's gifts exchanged, and tower cells echoing with fear, lingered like a half-remembered dream, both unsettling and strangely comforting in its very ambiguity. In 1542, the tragedy deepened when Catherine Howard, Henry VIII's young and vivacious fifth wife, was accused of adultery and stood before the block at the Tower. The news spread through court like wildfire. The Queen's youthful indiscretions, long whispered in darkened corridors, had at last come to light. In his fury, Henry could neither forgive nor forget. In a display of cold vindictiveness, he turned back to Anne of Cleves, the very woman he had once discarded, to vent his rage. He summoned her to court and demanded that she return the royal ring Catherine had once bestowed upon her. The gesture was a stark reminder of his power and of Anne's precarious position. Even a former queen could be commanded to forfeit the tokens of favour at a king's whim. Strangest of all, Anne did not receive the command with bitterness. Witnessing Catherine Howard's calamitous downfall, she dared to hope for reconciliation. In the quiet hours before dawn, Anne returned the ring to the royal jeweller's chest and entertained the notion in her heart that perhaps she might yet persuade Henry to remarry her. She imagined herself restored to that lofty station, believing that her earlier grace under pressure and her newfound mastery of English might sway the king's fickle affections. Once, she had been content to live unobtrusively on her country estates. Now, she toyed with the dream of donning the crown again. But Henry had already set his sights on another bride. Catherine Parr, a woman of gentle intellect and firm Protestant convictions, emerged as the sixth queen consort. Unlike Anne, Catherine Parr excelled in the courtly graces that Henry most prized. She was an accomplished musician who could play the virginal and the lute, and a skilled dancer who knew the measured steps of the latest Italianate minuets. These artistic talents held a particular allure for a king who saw in the arts not only personal pleasure, but also the reflection of his own cultured image. Watching Catherine Parr move across the ballroom floor, Henry felt a sense of kinship that he had never quite achieved with Anne, whose upbringing in the austere courts of Cleves had discouraged such frivolities. Anne, meanwhile, found that her fluency in English and her broad education, once considered assets, did little to bridge the gap between her and her former husband. She had devoted herself to mastering the language of Shakespeare's future court, and had studied the histories of Rome and Greece, yet she lacked the facility for music and dance that the king adored. Where Catherine Parr could accompany Henry in private performances of motets and psalms, Anne's voice remained untutored in song. Where Catherine could glide across the polished floors of Whitehall to the lilting strains of a consort, Anne's steps, learned from German masters, seemed too measured, too earnest. The personal disconnect grew, not from any failing in Anne's character, but from a mismatch of pleasures. Henry sought in his queen a confidant in refined pastimes, while Anne's strengths lay in governance, piety, and the sober duties of a ducal household. So the chapter closed on Anne's aspirations to reclaim the throne. Catherine Parr became the new queen, slipping seamlessly into the role of confidant, nurse, and companion to a king now in his early 50s. Yet Anne did not depart in disgrace. Instead, she retreated to Richmond, where she maintained her household with quiet dignity, hosting scholars and theologians, ministering to the poor, and preserving the fruits of her settlement, lands, revenues, and the style of Her Majesty's beloved sister. From this vantage, Anne watched the court's comings and goings with a serene detachment, no longer yearning for the crown she had worn so briefly. In the soft glow of Richmond's candlelit hallways, Anne might have reflected on the curious twists of her fate, chosen for her likeness in a painting, repudiated when reality failed the canvas, and yet spared the fatal errors of Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. Her endurance, her humility, and her refusal to succumb to bitterness preserved her life and her legacy long after the clamour of court politics had faded. She remained a silent witness to the king's later years, as Henry's health waned and his kingdom faced new uncertainties. And when she passed away in July of 1557, she left behind not only the memory of a marriage annulled, but the example of a woman who navigated the treacherous currents of Tudor power with unexpected grace. Thus, by the time the court had turned fully to Catherine Parr's ministrations and preparations for Henry's final marriage, Anne of Cleves had already charted her own path. Though her hopes for a second chance had been gently, irrevocably denied, she discovered in her exile a stability that neither crown nor scandal could unseat. In the hush before sleep, one might imagine her recalling the day she handed back the ring. A simple circle of gold, heavy with meaning, now returned to its vault. And as her eyelids drooped in the fading lamplight, she might have found comfort in the knowledge that her true strength lay not in crowns or ceremonies, but in the enduring dignity of a heart unbroken. Knowing well the influence held by the king's children, Anne wisely nurtured her bonds with each of them. She sent thoughtful gifts to the young Prince Edward VI, small silver toys and books of prayers bound in velvet, tokens designed to comfort and amuse the future monarch. To Princess Mary I, she dispatched parcels of preserved fruit and honey from her own orchards, a reminder of the sweetness and stability she offered. And for the young Princess Elizabeth, she bequeathed a delicate set of jewelled combs, each pin set with tiny pearls, foreshadowing the golden age that awaited England under her rule. Through these gestures, Anne freely shared her warmth and friendship, weaving herself into the fabric of the royal children's lives. Under Queen Mary's reign, Anne's careful cultivation of these relationships bore abundant fruit. Mary I, grateful for the kindness shown to her in youth, granted Anne special favours at court. The former queen was permitted to reside at Richmond with her own household, where she tended flower gardens and oversaw the education of local children in reading and prayer. News of Anne's benevolence spread through the countryside, where villagers spoke of her charitable donations and the gentle wisdom she offered. In her country retreat, Anne found a pastoral peace that had eluded her in the tumult of London, long walks beneath ancient oaks, quiet afternoons by the riverbank, and evenings spent reading by candlelight. Meanwhile, Henry VIII, ever generous in his own flamboyant way, ensured that Anne would never lack for comfort or precedence. He awarded her a generous annual income drawn from royal revenues, lands stretching across Kent and Sussex, and the right to entertain visiting dignitaries in her manor. More strikingly, he fixed her rank among the nobility. Only the queen consort and the king's daughters were to stand above her in precedence, making Anne the highest-ranking lady in the kingdom, after the royal family itself. To underscore her special status, Henry formally bestowed upon her the title of King's beloved sister. Imagine a sleepy observer drifting through the Great Hall at Westminster, where Anne's armorial bearings hung beside those of the royal line, an incongruous but telling emblem of affection and political necessity. Anne's twilight years unfolded with a steady dignity. Her days began with prayers at dawn, followed by visits to the infirmary she supported financially, where she comforted the sick with gentle words and blankets she had donated. Afternoons might find her instructing a group of children in needlework, or examining the latest legal petitions brought before her steward. Her evenings were reserved for quiet reflection and correspondence. Letters to her brother Duke Wilhelm, filled with news of courtly events, notes to Catherine Parr, sharing counsel on matters of faith, and occasional verses of poetry composed in her own hand. On the 16th day of July in the year 1557, Anne of Cleves breathed her last. At 41 years of age, she succumbed most likely to the unseen scourge of cancer that had shadowed her small, pale frame. In the hush that followed her passing, a cortege moved slowly through London streets toward Westminster Abbey. There, beneath the ancient stones, her body was laid to rest in a noble tomb inscribed simply, Anne of Cleves, Queen of England. The epitaph was a quiet defiance of the slights she had suffered, a reclamation of dignity that no annulment could erase. In that hallowed cloister, Anne became the only one of Henry VIII's wives to rest within the abbey's sacred confines. Her grave, though unassuming among the lofty monuments to kings and archbishops, carried a weight of narrative. It spoke of political machinations, personal humiliation, and the shrewd resilience of a woman who had once been cast aside. Pilgrims and scholars who later wandered those aisles would pause before her memorial, marvelling at the life it evoked. A story of a painted likeness transformed into flesh, of a fleeting reign followed by a lifetime of measured grace. Thus closed the final chapter of Anne's journey. From sheltered daughter of Cleves, through the glare of royal expectation, to the quiet dignity of an honoured sister to kings and queens. Her legacy, woven of political necessity, bitter disappointment, and steadfast kindness, endures in that simple inscription and in the memory of a court that learned, too late, the value of gentleness and forbearance. And as the abbey's candles guttered in the night air, those who remembered her last saw not just a discarded queen, but a companion of princes, a benefactress of the poor, and, above all, a woman whose quiet fortitude transcended the tumult of Tudor ambition. Before she became the short-lived queen, Anne of Cleves experienced a moment of controversy the very instant she set foot upon English soil. On New Year's Day, 1540, Her entourage paused at Rochester to rest. From the window of her chamber, Anne observed the violent spectacle of bull baiting in the town square. She remained calm, almost daydreaming. Far from the excitement Henry VIII had no doubt imagined his future bride would display. At that precise moment, a portly figure burst into the room. No one recognized him at first, but it was none other than Henry himself, disguised in plain clothes. The king, ever eager to test the magic of true love, believed that Anne would see through his ruse and greet him warmly. Instead, she merely furrowed her brow and leaned back, maintaining her distance, unmoved by his secret confession of affection. Some accounts even claim that Henry attempted to kiss or grope Anne, prompting the young Duchess to ring the alarm bell in alarm. The shrill clang echoed through the corridor, summoning startled attendants. Mortified and furious at being exposed, Henry fled the chamber, his face flushed with embarrassment. In that secret meeting room, the king's vaunted pride lay wounded before the eyes of all his ladies in waiting. The Rochester incident did more than bruise Henry's ego. It planted a seed of doubt deep in his heart. If Anne, seeing him as an unassuming gentleman, showed no interest, how could he expect her to maintain ardour for the crown and for him in the years to come? Though fleeting, the episode cast a long shadow over their arranged marriage and became the prelude to every tale that followed tales, whispered behind silken tapestries and penned in the margins of courtiers' letters. In the sleepy hush of the palace after midnight, one might imagine Anne leaning against the windowsill, gazing at the flickering torches in the courtyard below. She had witnessed a king's desperation masked by disguise, and she had responded with composed restraint rather than the playful recognition he sought. Her mind, already weary from the long journey, refused to be stirred by artifice. She saw in Henry not a romantic suitor but a ruler testing his power. Meanwhile, Henry returned to Whitehall in a state of vexation. He summoned his chamberlain to question the maids and pages who had witnessed the commotion. Each retelling painted Anne as inscrutable, her features impassive beneath the low candlelight. One attendant swore that Anne's gaze had been cool as English winter. Another insisted she barely spared him a bow before returning to her embroidery. These reports did little to soothe the king's wounded pride. Rather, they confirmed his worst fear that the picture had lied. Yet for Anne, the Rochester encounter was but a single, surreal moment amid her whirlwind approach to court life. She had travelled across the Channel, expecting to meet a king who loved her portrait, only to find a man eager to test his bride in disguise. She could scarcely imagine such a ruse in the polite courts of Cleves, where decorum guided every gesture. As she fastened her velvet cloak in the dim corridor, she may have wondered whether diplomacy could ever bridge such cultural gaps. In those days before the wedding, every whispered retelling of Rochester circulated among the courtiers, growing more sensational with each telling. Some even claimed that Anne had slapped the disguised king, though no credible witness supported that claim. Others said she had laughed softly at his unorthodox approach, mistaking him for a drunken page. All agreed, however, that Henry emerged, humiliated, and Anne remained unfazed. And so, as the palace prepared for the grand nuptials, the ghost of Rochester lingered in hushed corridors. Ladies in waiting refined their fans and rehearsed their curtsies, all the while exchanging glances that spoke volumes of the king's folly. Anne, for her part, practiced the solemn grace expected of a queen-to-be, mindful of the delicate balance between showing respect and preserving her own dignity. Thus did a single, brief encounter in a provincial inn set the stage for the tumult that followed. It revealed to Anne that beneath the gilded surface of English royalty lay games of power and subterfuge. It alerted Henry that love could not be summoned by disguise or by a painted likeness alone. And in the quiet of that Rochester evening, a royal drama unfolded so unassuming in its beginnings, and yet so instrumental in shaping the fortunes of a duchess who would become the least remembered, yet arguably the most resilient, of Henry VIII's queens. Many modern historians believe that it was Anne's cool response at Rochester that wounded Henry VIII's pride so deeply that he could not let go of his disappointment. Instead of accepting that the mismatch between portrait and person was a matter of Hans Holbein's flattering brushwork or Thomas Cromwell's enthusiastic persuasion, Henry locked his heart against any hope of affection. From that moment on, he steeled himself for the inevitable end of the marriage. The wedding protocol itself proceeded with all the pomp and pageantry befitting a Tudor court. 400 guests gathered in Westminster Hall, banners fluttered, and the organ's solemn chords echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling. Anne processed down the aisle in her ivory and silver gown, while Henry, in crimson velvet trimmed with ermine, watched impassively. Yet that very night, the bedchamber doors closed on what would be Anne's final chance to prove herself worthy of the crown. Instead of finding a willing, adoring bride, Henry found only the same quiet composure that had greeted him at Rochester. He reproached her again with the same lament. "Before I saw her, I thought well of her. Now that I have seen her, I like her much worse." These words, once delivered in private, soon became the talk of the court. Courtiers murmured in hushed tones that the king felt betrayed by his own vanity, that he had been fooled by a living picture into believing he would marry a queen of radiant beauty. Anne, however, remained silent. She listened to the rumour mill with gentle detachment, never raising her voice in protest. Even though no one gave her a chance to speak her mind, Henry's behaviour laid bare the unstable core of his character. A monarch who demanded unwavering admiration yet could not tolerate the slightest imperfection. His expectations were shaped by a culture of spectacle, where a ruler's image had to dazzle and enthrall. Anne, by contrast, had been raised in the disciplined courts of Cleves, where decorum and discreet courtesy mattered more than flamboyant charm. She had been taught to hide her emotions behind a measured smile, to weigh every word carefully. In Germany, such restraint was a sign of refinement. In Tudor England, it read as tepidity. This fundamental difference in emotional expression was at the heart of the tragic mismatch. Henry sought a partner who would mirror his own intensity, who would gaze at him with uncontainable admiration and passion. Anne offered instead a serene loyalty, a calm intelligence, and a capacity for quiet service. When Henry saw her reticence at Rochester, he interpreted it not as cultural difference, but as personal rejection. From that point forward, he viewed every meeting with her through the lens of disappointment. In the days following their wedding night, Henry's resolve hardened. He retreated into state affairs and left Anne to her own devices. The public saw her preside over banquets with admirable dignity, but private letters suggest she spent long hours in her chamber, embroidering heraldic motifs on velvet panels. Each stitch may have been an attempt to mend the rift between expectation and reality, but the gaps remained too wide. Thomas Cromwell's role in the match also came under scrutiny. The king's ministers whispered that Cromwell had been too eager, too confident in his scheme. They speculated that he had downplayed Anne's German upbringing, convinced himself that shared Protestant beliefs would suffice to bind the couple together. But religion, it turned out, offered no remedy for thwarted vanity. Henry's personal wrath at being tricked eclipsed any political alliance. As the weeks passed, it became clear that Henry's mind was made up. He penned letters the following spring, instructing his council to gather evidence of a prior contract between Anne and another suitor, an 11-year-old promise to Francis of Lorraine. This pre-contract, though inscrutable in Anne's childhood memory, would serve as the legal basis for annulment. It was a final confirmation that Henry would not brook compromise. His discontent at Rochester and his disgust on the wedding night had sealed their fate. Anne, ever composed, submitted quietly to the annulment proceedings. She refused to cast blame on Holbein or Cromwell, on Rochester's bull-baiting or the cold stone of Westminster. Instead, she took her leave with graceful silence, preserving a shred of dignity in the face of a king's wounded ego. Though Tudor etiquette offered her little space to argue, her conduct spoke volumes. She would not add public scandal to her private sorrow. Thus, the saga of Anne and Henry illuminates a broader truth about the perils of romantic expectation. A painting, no matter how skillful, could not capture the nuances of living flesh. A diplomatic match, no matter how well planned, could founder on the shoals of personal vanity and cultural misunderstanding. Modern historians still debate whether Anne might have flourished under different circumstances, but the evidence remains clear. Henry VIII, once beguiled by a portrait, could not survive the shock of reality. In the twilight hush of history, one can almost hear the whispered lament of a king who demanded undying devotion and found only serene indifference. And one can imagine Anne, long after departing Whitehall, reflecting on the curious alchemy that turned promise into disappointment, an alchemy born not of malice, but of unmet expectation, of a cultural chasm that no bridal gown, no royal bedchamber, no elaborate ceremony could bridge. Beyond diplomatic necessity and political motive, Rochester stands as evidence of a grievous misstep in statecraft. When the Cleves delegation arrived in England, they were unprepared for the king's tactics that transcended the bounds of courtesy. Henry VIII's decision to don a disguise and approach Anne in secret betrayed the level of respect the German party rightfully expected. Such a ruse, under the guise of testing true love, sowed mistrust from the very first encounter. Many modern historians argue that a more sincere approach, perhaps joining Anne at the bull-baiting display in plain sight, or maintaining the formal protocols of a royal welcome, might have left her impressed, even genuinely warmed to him. Instead, Henry's cat-and-mouse game felt intrusive, as though he had violated a private space that no painting or ceremony could restore. Anne, accustomed to the cultured restraint of Cleves, where decorum governed every interaction, found herself faced with a rude breach of trust. In the dim light of that Rochester chamber, Henry's ambition overrode diplomacy. He believed that disguise would grant him insight into his bride's true heart, yet it achieved the opposite. It revealed his own insecurities and undermined any hope of mutual respect. Anne's slight frown, her cool withdrawal, spoke volumes to those who witnessed it. She saw not a romantic suitor but a king testing her dignity. This incident is more than a curious anecdote in Anne's life. It underscores a vital lesson about the limits of regal power. Authority can command armies, but it cannot command genuine affection or trust. A painted portrait, no matter how skillful, is only a semblance of character. A forced intrigue can never substitute for warm sincerity. The Cleves envoy expected the solemn pageantry of royal reception. Instead, they encountered subterfuge. Henry paid dearly for this misjudgment. His failure to secure Anne's goodwill at Rochester foreshadowed the collapse of the marriage. The political alliance with Cleves meant to strengthen England against the might of the Holy Roman Empire in Spain, founded on the shoals of wounded pride. In the end, no treaty or financial settlement could compensate for the lack of personal respect. Anne, for her part, carried the memory of that clandestine meeting wherever she went. She later confided in a trusted confidant that the moment she realized her dignity had been compromised, she resolved to protect it at all costs. Thus, she greeted subsequent courtiers with a polite reserve that belied her inner warmth. She had learned a lesson in royal diplomacy. One's honor cannot be bartered away for the sake of alliance. The lessons of Rochester extend beyond Cleves and Tudor England. They resonate through the annals of history as a warning. Power unsecured by genuine regard is destined to unravel. Even the most meticulously arranged marriages, underpinned by grand political designs, require a foundation of mutual respect. Without that, every gesture of goodwill rings hollow. For Henry VIII, the fallout was immediate and irrevocable. He distrusted every glance Anne cast his way, interpreting courtesy as calculation. When the wedding night failed to kindle his passion, he recalled Rochester's incident and let it guide his condemnation. The marriage, never rooted in trust, could not survive disappointment. In hindsight, one can imagine a gentler path. Henry emerging from the crowd at Rochester, not in disguise, but sitting beside Anne to watch the bulls, offering her a comforting word or a shared laugh. He might have shown her that he valued her intellect and her faith above mere beauty. In return, Anne might have responded with guarded enthusiasm, rewarding him with cautious optimism. Yet Henry chose differently. His gambit, born of vanity and insecurity, transformed what should have been a moment of welcome into an act of intrusion. It revealed the perils of equating image with reality, and demonstrated that even a king's whim can carry the sting of betrayal. The bride who stepped onto English soil, expecting ceremony, instead found herself the subject of a covert test, one from which the marriage never recovered. Thus, Rochester remains a cautionary tale, a reminder that true respect must be offered openly, not extracted through trickery. A kindly gesture, extended in full view, can forge bonds of loyalty stronger than any alliance signed on parchment. But a hidden assault on dignity, no matter how well intended, can inflict wounds that no crown can heal. In the quiet aftermath, as courtiers whispered of that fateful New Year's Day, both Anne and Henry learned that the art of rule requires more than authority. It demands empathy, sincerity, and above all, the recognition of another's honourable heart. The conclusion of Anne of Cleves' story is not solely defined by a failed marriage, but rather by a remarkable journey of self-affirmation. Though she earned the moniker the rejected queen, Anne possessed many praiseworthy qualities: unwavering patience, keen intellect, and the art of prudent diplomacy. Instead of drowning in bitterness, she seized upon her connections with Henry's children to cultivate a lasting influence at court. First, Anne demonstrated extraordinary patience. In the months following the annulment, while other discarded queens might have raged or receded into obscurity, Anne maintained her composure. She accepted the king's decision without protest, choosing to channel her energy into more productive pursuits. This steadfast calm earned her respect among nobles and commoners alike. When courtiers whispered cruelly of her brief tenure, she responded not with recrimination, but with steady courtesy, an attitude that spoke louder than any defense she could have mounted. Second, her intellect became a powerful asset. Fluent in both Latin and French, Anne was an avid reader of history and theology. She engaged scholars in learned discourse in her chamber at Richmond Palace, often hosting small gatherings of theologians and humanists. Her reputation as a thoughtful patron of the arts and letters grew, and she became known as a woman of discernment, capable of nuanced judgment. In a court that prized spectacle, her quiet wisdom stood out as a refreshing contrast. Third, Anne mastered the art of prudent diplomacy. She recognized early on that her path to influence lay in the royal children, for they were the future of the Tudor line. To Prince Edward VI, she sent carefully chosen gifts: ornate prayer books bound in velvet, intended to nurture piety in the young heir. To Princess Mary I, she offered jars of honey and preserved fruit from her own estates, gestures that spoke of sustenance and care. And to Princess Elizabeth I, she bequeathed a set of silver-encrusted combs, heirlooms that would become treasured mementos for the future queen. Each token was selected with thoughtful intent, a symbol of her enduring affection. Through these acts, Anne became a trusted confidant. Under Queen Mary's reign, Anne's prior kindness influenced royal favour. Mary granted Anne the right to reside in Richmond under her own household, where Anne supervised charitable works and offered patronage to local artisans. Mary's entreaties often mentioned the old queen's gentle guidance during Mary's youth, a reminder that Anne's influence had outlasted her brief queenship. When Edward ascended the throne, Anne's relationship with him was no less significant. Though Edward was young, only 9 years old when crowned, he regarded Anne as a kindly aunt. She took pleasure in sending him brightly illustrated prayer books and small equestrian statuettes carved from ivory. These gifts fostered a sense of familial loyalty that endured, even as Edward's regents governed in his name. Elizabeth, too, remembered Anne fondly upon her own accession. The set of combs Anne had given her was passed down through generations. Some accounts suggest that Elizabeth wore those very combs on the day of her coronation, a quiet testament to Anne's enduring legacy. By the time Elizabeth became queen, Anne had long since withdrawn from active politics, yet her early gestures of friendship resonated decades later. When Anne finally retired to the peace of her English estates, she lived in dignity and ease. She oversaw the cultivation of orchards and gardens, directed the weaving of tapestries for her great hall, and welcomed acquaintances for afternoon readings of classical poetry. Local villagers spoke of her generous alms to the poor and her discreet interventions on behalf of those in need. In this comfortable seclusion, Anne enjoyed the tranquility that a tumultuous court had never afforded her. Her life stands as a singular example of a civilized divorce. In an era when divorce often led to disgrace or worse, Anne emerged unscathed, her reputation intact. She did not retreat into bitterness, but rather wrote a new chapter, a chapter of resilience, influence, and quiet service. Her story challenges the notion that a woman's worth was defined solely by her marital status. Instead, Anne's worth shone in her steadfast character and her capacity to transform personal setback into enduring respect. In the annals of European history, few tales of royal separation are as graceful. While other queens of Henry VIII met tragic ends or faded into obscurity, Anne of Cleves forged a path of enlightened self-reinvention. She transcended her brief moment on the throne to become a figure of compassion and wisdom, admired by princes and paupers alike. Her journey reminds us that true nobility lies not in crowns or titles, but in the strength of character and the generosity of spirit. Thus, the final scene of Anne's life, is one of serene accomplishment. No longer the rejected queen, she stood recognized as a gracious noblewoman, a beloved aunt, and a patron of learning. Her legacy endures in the respectful precedence granted to her, in the cherished memories of England's monarchs, and in the simple dignity with which she lived her days, proof that even the most turbulent of royal dramas can yield a quietly triumphant conclusion. The happy ending of Anne of Cleves rests not in a fairy tale restoration to a throne, but in the enduring reputation and remembrance she secured across generations. On the 16th day of July in the year 1557, Anne passed away in England. She was laid to rest with solemn ceremony at Westminster Abbey, under the simple yet profound inscription, Anne of Cleves, Queen of England. Remarkably, she is the only wife of Henry VIII to receive such a distinguished burial in that sacred place. In the twilight hush of the Abbey's cloisters, travellers and pilgrims pause before her grave, a modest slab of stone among grand monuments, and wonder at the life she led. Political manoeuvring, blunt rejection, and even baseless rumour had swirled around her like autumn leaves in a bitter wind. Yet Anne emerged from those storms with her head held high, her dignity intact, and her name unblemished. Her story began with the notorious Rochester incident on New Year's Day, 1540, where she had scarcely acknowledged a disguised king. It continued through a 6-month marriage that crumbled on the rocks of unmet expectations. Then came her surprising role as the king's beloved sister, a status granted after her annulment, which allowed her to maintain influence at court without the burdens of queenship. Under Queen Mary I, Anne lived comfortably in rural estates, her days marked by charitable works and quiet scholarship. Through careful friendship with Mary and Edward VI, and a tender guardianship of young Elizabeth I, she wove herself into the tapestry of Tudor dynastic life. Yet it was in her final years that Anne's legacy crystallized. Across the countryside, villagers spoke of her generosity, the blankets she distributed to the poor in winter, the alms she provided to orphaned children, the steady stewardship of her lands. The same hands that had once fastened royal veils now tended orchards and taught needlework in parish halls. She was remembered not as a discarded queen, but as a benefactress whose compassion transcended titles. At court, her memory took on an almost legendary quality. Elizabeth I, in her later reign, wore the jewelled combs once given by Anne as symbols of continuity and grace. Ministers and courtiers spoke of Anne's composed acceptance of annulment with admiration, contrasting her conduct with the tragic ends suffered by Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. In the retelling, Anne became the heroine of a civilized divorce, a rare example of a royal separation conducted with civility and mutual respect. Meanwhile, historians and chroniclers preserved her tale in annals and memoirs. They noted that despite the rejected queen label, Anne's true victory lay in her ability to transform personal setback into a wellspring of influence and goodwill. She had discovered that real power often resides not in crown or scepter, but in the capacity to embrace adversity, forge sincere connections, and leave the world better than one found it. On July 16th, 1557, the abbey bells tolled mournfully as Anne was carried through Westminster's nave. Mourners noble and common stood respectfully, recalling the woman who once navigated the glittering but treacherous waters of Tudor politics with calm resolve. The inscription on her tomb, declaring her a queen, served as a final testament. Though her marriage was annulled, her dignity and station had been restored in the hearts of her contemporaries and in the memory of posterity. And so, the arc of Anne's life, from the awkward bull-baiting view at Rochester to the quiet triumph of her tombstone, reminds us that failure can be the crucible of reinvention. Her 6-month tenure as queen, though fraught with disappointment, became the crucible in which her character was tempered. Her subsequent role as royal sister and generous patron allowed her to wield influence more subtly but no less effectively. In time, the woman who was once dismissed by a monarch became celebrated for her patience, her wisdom, and her indomitable spirit. Anne of Cleves' journey thus transcends the usual narrative of royal drama. It teaches that the truest victory is found in resilience, the ability to endure public humiliation, to adapt to new circumstances, and to cultivate lasting bonds of trust and affection. As visitors leave Westminster Abbey, they carry with them the gentle lesson of Anne's life, that sometimes the greatest triumph emerges not from clasping a crown, but from the grace with which one bears its loss. In that sense, The rejected queen became the enduring legend, whispering through the ages that failure may indeed serve as the stepping stone to a different, perhaps greater, kind of success. After the Rochester incident, and even before the formal end of her marriage, Anne of Cleves set about carefully cultivating a new reputation in the eyes of the English populace. Rather than withdraw into the ashes of her failed union, she turned her attention to the king's children, most notably the young Prince Edward VI, to reaffirm her standing at court. Anne recognized that, despite her curtailed queenship, she still possessed a unique bond with the royal family. To the boy destined one day to rule England, she sent elegant silk garments in gentle shades of sky blue and soft rose. Each outfit was tailored to fit his slight frame: doublet and breeches edged with silver braid, a miniature mantle lined with fur, and a cap adorned with a single ostrich plume. Alongside these, she dispatched intricate wooden puzzles and tiny chess sets carved from boxwood, games designed both to amuse and to sharpen his mind. These tokens were not merely playthings. They spoke of a guardian's affection, a benevolent aunt whose concern extended beyond protocol. Word of Anne's thoughtful generosity spread quickly through the corridors of Whitehall. Courtiers noted that even the most cynical among them found themselves touched by her gestures. Princess Mary I, Henry VIII's eldest daughter, was among the first to respond. In quiet conversation, Mary confided to her ladies-in-waiting that Anne's gifts had reminded her of simpler times, before court politics became a minefield of treachery. Their correspondence began with thanks penned in Mary's own hand, and soon blossomed into heartfelt letters sharing personal confidences, Mary's hopes for the kingdom, her anxieties about succession, and her recollections of her mother's kindness in childhood. Through this growing intimacy, Anne established what historians now call her soft power at court. She was no longer simply the divorced queen. She was a trusted friend to the princess who would one day occupy the throne, and Mary was not slow to show her gratitude. Under Mary's reign, Anne enjoyed privileges rarely accorded to women of her station, privileges that would sustain her peace and comfort in the years to come. Invitations to grand banquets arrived by the dozen. Tables laden with roasted peacocks, sugar sculptures, and spiced hippocras. She was likewise welcomed at solemn religious ceremonies, masses officiated by the Archbishop of Canterbury, and processions through the abbey cloisters, despite the brevity of her own time as queen. But it was not mere festivity that Mary granted her old friend. She also increased Anne's financial stipend and expanded her landholdings. In an age when even high-born women had scant control over property, Anne found herself oddly empowered. New manors in Somerset and Wiltshire were added to her portfolio, and the lease on a thriving vineyard near Canterbury was extended to her lifetime. These grants, bestowed by royal decree, ensured that Anne's final years would be lived in tranquility rather than want. Importantly, Anne's example demonstrated that a marriage dissolved need not equate to social oblivion. With sagacity and sincerity, she transformed her public image from rejected consort to esteemed royal sister. Her tactful outreach to Edward and Mary, coupled with her unwavering dignity, proved that personal misfortune could be alchemized into lasting influence. Where others might have nursed grievances, Anne chose engagement. Where some might have succumbed to shame, she embraced service. As the years passed, villagers near her estate spoke of her benevolence. Cloth for the poor, alms for orphans, and meals served to the needy on winter mornings. At court, noblemen marveled at her resilience. Scholars praised her patronage of learning, and even foreign ambassadors remarked on her gentle presence amid the often merciless world of Tudor politics. Thus did Anne of Cleves forge a new chapter, a chapter not of fleeting royalty, but of enduring respect. In weaving bonds of friendship with Edward VI and Mary I, she secured her place in history as more than a footnote to Henry VIII's matrimonial misadventures. She became a living testament to the power of graceful conduct and genuine goodwill. In the hushed hours before sleep, one might imagine Anne reflecting on her journey, from the awkward hush of Rochester to the stately halls of Westminster, from a hastily arranged marriage to a cherished role as royal sister. Her transformation reminds us that true stature is measured not by crowns worn but by kindness shown, not by ceremonies attended but by relationships nurtured. And in that way, Anne of Cleves, once dismissed, and soon to be departed, left behind a legacy of wisdom, that the bravest triumphs often arise not in victory at court, but in the humble victories of the heart. The final chapter of Anne's life was marked by personal achievements and an enduring legacy that would outlive her. When Elizabeth I ascended the throne, Anne greeted the new queen with genuine affection and deep respect. Understanding the importance of education in shaping a ruler's character, she established scholarships for young noblewomen at court. These endowments provided funds for books, tutors, and living stipends, allowing promising girls to study history, languages, and the arts subjects once the exclusive province of princes. Anne's gesture was not only an act of compassion, but also a savvy political move. By investing in Elizabeth's circle, she reinforced ties with the new regime and demonstrated that power could be secured through alliance building as well as royal birth. In addition to academic patronage, Anne made a final, personal gift to Elizabeth. She bequeathed a portion of her own jewellery collection, intricately worked pendants and finger rings set with garnets and pearls, to the future queen. Among these was a heart-shaped locket containing a lock of Anne's own fair hair, bound with a crimson ribbon. Such treasures carried deep symbolic weight, testifying to Anne's heartfelt goodwill and her understanding that influence often rests on the smallest tokens of remembrance. To receive jewellery from a former queen was to acknowledge a bond that transcended the formalities of court. Anne's dedication to Elizabeth's welfare was a continuation of the friendships she had carefully nurtured with Henry's children. By the time Elizabeth reached maturity, she remembered Anne not as a rejected consort but as a caring mentor. Elizabeth's later recollections spoke of Anne's visits to her apartments, reading poems together by candlelight and advising on matters of state etiquette. These memories helped cement Anne's reputation as a woman of genuine warmth and wisdom. When Anne breathed her last on the 16th day of July in the year 1557, she was 41 years old. The likely cause of her passing was cancer, though contemporary accounts spoke simply of a lingering illness. In her final days, she had arranged for a peaceful resting place, befitting one who had held the highest honour in England. Carried in a simple yet stately procession, her body was interred at Westminster Abbey, the hallowed necropolis of monarchs and nobility. The stone slab above her tomb bore the inscription, "Anne of Cleves, Queen of England," a gift of recognition from Henry VIII himself. Despite the brevity of their union, only 6 months, the king ensured that his former wife would receive the dignity of a royal burial. To be laid to rest in Westminster Abbey was a privilege denied to most queens consort of England. Anne's interment there did more than commemorate her title. It validated her resilience and her reclamation of honour and independence. In life, she had navigated the perilous currents of Tudor power with measured courtesy. In death, she claimed a place among England's sovereigns. Pilgrims who later wandered the Abbey's aisles paused before her simple tomb, contemplating the paradox of a queen whose reign was annulled, yet whose memory endured unblemished. Anne's story stands as one of the rare, amicable divorce narratives in European history. In an age when royal separations often ended in banishment, disgrace, or worse, she emerged with her character intact. Her life illustrated that a woman could weather the public humiliation of rejection and still build a dignified, independent existence. She proved that personal standing is not confined to one's marital status, but is rooted in the capacity to adapt, to cultivate sincere relationships, and to enact genuine benevolence. Long after the candles in her chapel guttered out, Anne's name lived on in biographies, letters, and the oral histories of those who remembered her kindness. Elizabeth I, in her own reign, referenced Anne's scholarships when advocating for female education. Courtiers cited Anne's burial inscription as evidence of Henry's final generosity. Even today, historians marvel at how Anne transformed adversity into a platform for service, leaving behind a blueprint for navigating political failure with grace. Thus, the ultimate victory for Anne of Cleves was not the crown she briefly wore, but the legacy she forged afterwards. From the awkward hush of Rochester to the scholarly gatherings at her country manor, Anne's life charted a course from repudiation to respect. Her final resting place in Westminster Abbey serves as a lasting testament that true power often lies not in ceremonies of marriage, but in the quiet triumphs of compassion, intellect, and unyielding dignity. And so, the rejected queen became a legend whose final act was to demonstrate that failure can indeed be the foundation of a much greater success. The fact that Anne of Cleves is the only one of Henry VIII's former wives to rest at Westminster Abbey is a paradox ripe with philosophical resonance. Here lies the monarch renowned for his harshness and capricious rule, the same Henry who reshaped England's religion and executed those who displease him. Yet his final gesture to Anne granted her an enduring legacy. He bestowed upon her a material throne in death, interring her among kings and queens. But the spiritual throne belonged instead to a modern woman of learning, intellect, and profound relational skill. Anne's life had always placed her in a supporting role. She entered history as a figure in someone else's drama, first in Holbein's brushstrokes, then in Cromwell's political calculations, and finally in the king's ambitions. Yet in the wake of her brief marriage, she achieved something far greater than a crown. She transformed failure into triumph. Through gracious conduct, she cultivated trust with Henry's children. Through calm perseverance, she weathered the storm of court gossip and royal repudiation. And through deliberate indifference to the sneers of a regime that once mocked her, she preserved her dignity. In the shadow of Henry's grand portrait gallery, and alongside the fates of his more infamous consorts, Anne maintained a quiet realm of her own. While others were lost to execution or exile, she clung to her sense of self, never allowing her identity to be wholly consumed by royal caprice. The true measure of her success lay not in the fabric of her gowns or the stones of her tomb, but in the strength of character she displayed as she navigated the treacherous currents of Tudor politics. Subsequent generations of historians often point to Anne as a sterling example of what they term soft power. She demonstrated that influence need not be wielded with iron fist or theatrical display. Instead, it can be cultivated through the gentle art of relationship building, a well-chosen gift, a sympathetic ear, a discreet word of counsel. These were the tools of her trade, and they proved more enduring than any royal decree. Consider the young Elizabeth I, who would come to epitomize the Elizabethan Golden Age. As a princess, Elizabeth received Anne's careful kindness, scholarships that enriched her education, a locket of hair that symbolized enduring affection, and the memory of a duchess who believed in her potential. That early foundation of respect and support helped shape a future queen capable of balancing strength with empathy, ruling a nation to its cultural zenith. Anne's influence, though unacknowledged in royal annals, lives on in the legacy of English stability and flourishing that Elizabeth secured. Anne's unique position at Westminster Abbey adds another layer of meaning. The Abbey is more than a burial ground. It is a pantheon of English identity. To be interred there is to be woven into the tapestry of national myth. Henry's decision to grant Anne that honour despite the brevity of her tenure speaks to a recognition of her singular grace. In death, she transcended the rejection of her marriage to claim a place in the narrative of England's continuity. This paradox of a king renowned for severity yet capable of bestowing such a thoughtful end underscores the complexity of their relationship. Henry might have judged Anne by the closeness of her kiss or the warmth of her welcome, yet he ultimately acknowledged her worth in a more lasting way. He recognized, perhaps instinctively, that a bond of respect and generosity can outlast political necessity and personal disappointment. Modern observers can take several lessons from Anne's story. The first is that resilience often entails more than mere endurance. It requires active cultivation of one's reputation and alliances. Anne did not simply survive her annulment. She thrived in its aftermath by forging sincere bonds. The second is that true power can lie in the margins rather than at the centre. Although her queenship lasted but 6 months, her lifelong influence spanned 3 reigns, from Edward VI to Mary I to Elizabeth I. Her strategic patience and humility allowed her to remain relevant and respected long after her official role dissolved. Finally, Anne's journey reminds us that dignity can be a form of resistance. In an environment dominated by spectacle and authority, she chose the quieter path of courtesy and principle. She demonstrated that even the most turbulent of setbacks can yield a narrative of triumph, provided one possesses the wisdom to steer through adversity with composure. Thus, in Westminster Abbey's silent aisles, where vaults echo with the footsteps of monarchs and poets alike, Anne of Cleves occupies a niche all her own. She shines not as a tragic footnote but as a testament to the enduring potency of soft power. In the hush before sleep, her story whispers across centuries that the greatest throne a person may claim is not emblazoned in gold, but constructed of integrity, kindness, and steadfast resolve. And in that sense, the rejected queen ascended to heights that no annulment could ever diminish. Yet in the end, a single lingering question remains. What was it that caused Henry VIII, undoubtedly the most powerful monarch in Western Christendom, to feel such profound disappointment upon meeting Anne of Cleves? Beyond the strategic calculations and diplomatic imperatives, many modern historians argue that the king's reaction sprang from a deeper personal insecurity. Henry craved adoration. He longed for beauty and unbridled passion in his consort, yet Anne exuded a serene dignity and spoke little. This clash of temperaments ensured that the two would never find a common language of the heart. From the hush of Rochester's chamber to the hush of their wedding night bedchamber, Anne's measured reserve pricked Henry's wounded pride. He had expected a bride who would mirror his own fervour, someone to gaze at him with rapture and fascination. Instead, she regarded him with calm politeness, betraying neither elation nor ardour. To Henry, this was not mere cultural difference. It felt like personal rejection. His vanity recoiled, and doubt set in. If she could show such detachment at first sight, would she ever offer him the devotion he believed he deserved? Henry's early travels with Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn had taught him the intoxicating power of youthful charm. He remembered Catherine's shy devotion, her tears of gratitude when he praised her, and Boleyn's witty, coquettish banter that left him laughing long into the night. But Anne, raised in the solemn courts of Cleves, had never learned those arts. Her childhood lessons in theology and history, her afternoons spent embroidering under the watchful eye of her mother, had taught her discretion rather than display. To Henry's eyes, that discretion became frigidity. In that decisive moment, Henry realized his portrait had promised one thing, but reality delivered another. He felt betrayed by Holbein's promise of truth in paint, betrayed by Cromwell's assurances that Anne's character matched her visage. His wounded self-esteem could not accept that a living person might defy his expectations. And so, from Rochester's subdued greeting to the whispered rebuke on their wedding night, "Before I saw her, I thought well of her. Now I like her much worse." Henry retreated behind a fortress of disappointment. He resolved that no affection could penetrate again. This tale stands as a testament to the limits of power. Henry could marshal hundreds of ships and tens of thousands of soldiers, yet he could not command the warmth of another's heart. He could dissolve a marriage with a stroke of the pen, but he could not dissolve his own wounded vanity. In that sense, the Cleves episode reveals the paradox at the core of monarchy. A king may be sovereign over kingdoms, yet remain powerless before the mysteries of human emotion. Modern scholars view this episode as more than courtly scandal. They see in it a cautionary allegory. The moment a ruler mistakes image for reality, he invites his own undoing. Henry's gambit to test love through disguise was an assault on Anne's autonomy, a reminder that authority, when wielded without empathy, corrodes trust. And in Anne's polite, unflinching composure, we glimpse the enduring truth that genuine connection cannot be forged under duress. So the story of Henry and Anne becomes a mirror held up to power itself. No matter how resplendent the crown, no matter how lavish the ceremony, the most fundamental currency of all remains the simple capacity to earn another's trust and affection. Henry's regret, whispered at Rochester and echoed on his wedding night, reminds us that true authority is not measured by the might of armies or the splendor of courts, but by the courage to accept reality as it is, and by the grace to honor the dignity of others, even when they defy our expectations. In the quiet hours of history's night, we find in this union a poignant lesson. The highest throne in the land cannot compel love. Only humility, sincerity, and the willingness to embrace difference can bridge the gap between portrait and person. And it is there, in that humbling space between expectation and truth, that the true measure of character and of power reveals itself. And so, the journey of Anne of Cleves has come to its conclusion, but not in tragedy instead, as a gentle reminder of the power of patience, wisdom, and compassion. When we look back at this tumultuous chapter of history, we realize that failure is not the final destination, but merely a turning point that allows us to rebuild ourselves stronger. Throughout her story, Anne showed us that even though status may arrive and vanish in the blink of an eye, human worth, character, insight, and the capacity to treat others with genuine kindness is the true, lasting legacy. She teaches us that sometimes, by stepping back a little, by keeping our hearts light and open, we find the quickest path to inner peace and our rightful place in life. Let the light of kindness illuminate your way. When you encounter setbacks, do not collapse under their weight, for no painting was ever completed without a few smudges. Believe that each smudge can become a unique brushstroke, enriching your life's narrative with depth and value. Whoever you are, wherever you stand, you always have the opportunity to transform hardship into strength, to use your intellect and sincere affection to build lasting bonds, just as Anne did with the Tudor princes and princess. Now, as you slow your pace, you may close your eyes, inhale deeply, and let images of opulent palaces, glittering jewels, and lavish feasts gently fade. Instead, feel the soft caress of a night breeze, the moonlight filtering through leaves, and a sense of calm weaving through every fibre of your being. The clamour of the bustling city, every jarring sound, recedes into the distance, leaving only a tender stillness that invites you to drift into sleep. Perhaps you will dream of Anne of Cleves's portrait not as a flawless oil painting, but as a mirror reflecting the strength of the spirit. Carry that message with you into your dreams, that you are worthy of respect, deserving of love, and that your greatest power resides within your own heart. Thank you for journeying with us through every step of history. Please press the subscribe button so you won't miss the newest and most captivating stories from Emotional Echoes. We look forward to welcoming you back in our next videos, where past and present entwine to bring you profound and meaningful experiences. Sweet dreams, and may you have the most beautiful visions. Whispering gently, sleep well, my friend.